Hi, everybody. It's S.J. Thomason, and today I'm going to talk about a video that I just spotted from JP Sears from the Awaken with JP YouTube channel. It's a very popular channel. JP is a comedian, and I've been following him for a while. In fact, I remember the first video that I saw of his, and it was a play on atheists, and it was kind of an amusing video, and so I subscribed right away. And ever since then, he's been posting lots of videos about his conservative views and his anti-communist views and a lot of other political issues. And so he's very amusing, and I've been following him for a while. But today I happened upon this video where you can see him there in the shirt that says "God, God." And apparently JP has gone from a person who is very spiritual to a person who is, and he's still conservative, to a person who wants to exalt God, which I think is wonderful, and exalt Christianity, which I also think is wonderful. He realized that he had thrown the baby out with the bathwater, and the bathwater contained elements that were unsavory, some of the bathwater elements, which would be heirs of the church and some faults in the past. But I would like to say that maybe JP might want to consider keeping some aspects of that bathwater. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today, but I'm going to review his video and play quite a bit of it because I think it's really valuable what he has to say. And I'm also going to discuss how a lot of the stuff that we see with an us versus them mentality that's so pervasive in society, how that is explained through social identity theory, which also falls into self-categorization theory. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. It's an academic term, a couple of academic terms. They're in my field of research, my discipline. I publish studies on things related to those terms. In fact, I have a study under review that talks about the distinguishes Planned Parenthood from also the care providers, the pregnancy care providers and pregnancy resource centers. And so it talks about the us versus them and how each of them basically identifies with their group against the out group. And they sort of depersonalize the out group and justify some morally illegitimate actions. But I don't want to digress too much. Let's go ahead and listen to JP's video. And I'm going to do a little bit of commentary on it. And I also want to say hi if Shiami is still in the chat. It's wonderful to see you. I will be watching the chat as well as I can and commenting. So if you have any thoughts or questions as we go through this, please feel free to post something, maybe post a hashtag to my name so you can get my attention. So here we go. Let's listen to JP.
I changed my mind about God.
Before he says that, he's going to talk about the value of changing your mind. I'm a person who's gone, let me just explain this, born a Catholic to a Republican family. In a Republican family, we loved Ronald Reagan and all that kind of stuff. Then in the 90s, I drifted away from both Catholicism and from Republicans. I declared myself a Democrat. I became way more liberal, and I started being very spiritual and a very weak Christian, so I can understand change. Then in my early 40s, I came back to Christianity. Before that, I married a Lutheran. I declared myself a Lutheran within the church, but I really didn't follow it very closely. I was truly actually still a spiritualist, and I hadn't even looked into Jesus' resurrection. Then I ended up stumbling into a Baptist church in my early 40s, declared myself a Baptist. I was baptized again. I was still liberal, but I started becoming less and less controlled, I should say, by the liberal Democrat philosophy. I realized some of the major flaws in that party, and I declared recently myself an independent. I don't want to have a political party, and I've also reverted back to Catholicism. And so I am somebody who gets change, and I think when you do learn more information and you study things deeply, it's okay to change your mind about things. You don't have to be static. So here's what he says.
I was wrong. So accordingly, in this video, I want to share with you what I used to believe, what I believe now, and what made me change my mind along the way. And also, very importantly, I want to share with you a few thoughts of mine that I have that will help us bring more God, not only into our lives, but also the world around us, which seems like it needs a lot more God right now.
True.
Because I don't know about you, but living in a world where Satan reigns and you and I and our families have to suffer the consequences doesn't really feel appealing to me. And also, quick disclaimer, this video is not intended to be a comedy video. And if that offends you, pray about it. So what I used to think about God that I now say, yeah, I was wrong about, I used to have a lot of judgment about religion and Christianity, thinking like, it's not bad, but it's like, dude, that's so outdated and like, get with it. Why are you religious when you could be spiritual? And along with that, I became very inundated in the spiritual movement. So like spirituality, not religion. Like the evolved thinkers are spiritual, not religious. They're also evolved enough to always have to tell you that they're spiritual, not religious. That was me.
And I was like that too. That's what's funny about it. I used to read books by Wayne Dyer, and a lot of the books focus on self. In fact, it's all about your sacred self. The self becomes your God. And it's very similar to some of the other religions in the world that are focused inward on the self, like Buddhism. And the interesting thing about that is it sometimes turns into a very pantheistic view where God is in everything. God is part of you. You are your own God. You eventually will die and you'll be reincarnated. And at some point, you will blend into the cosmos and you will think about yourself as a part of the universe. That is a very interesting dialogue that you have in your own mind. And it's how I used to think.
And while I was in there, I will honestly say I got a lot of benefit from spiritual teachings, like different teachers, different books, different philosophies. I got a lot of benefit from that. But when I look back, I can see I was excluding some amazing traditional Christian values, beliefs of God, and ways of connecting with God that I now really value. But out of what I would call spiritual arrogance, I was excluding them, just judging them to be, oh, that's old, outdated stuff. And like,
He's so right about this because one of the things that we do is we don't appreciate the fact that we are here on the shoulders of giants, and we have some spiritual giants in the church, spiritual religious giants in the church. And I can exalt the Catholic Church among those because the Catholic was the first church. It was the one, on this rock I will build my church and the gates of hell will not prevail. But besides that, the other churches are very important too because they all add the importance of Jesus and the importance of focusing on others. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you, Jesus told us.
Y'all need to get spiritual like me. And with that, I didn't believe in the immense power of prayer. I used to think, well, prayer's probably a good thing. It'll maybe give you a more positive mood, a more positive outlook. But I didn't truly believe in the power of prayer, where people are directly asking God for God's support and then receiving that support from God. Yeah, I didn't really believe that it actually happened.
And it does work. A lot of people think that when you pray, God sometimes ignores your prayers, but God hears each and every one of our prayers. Whether he answers it in the way that we want is another issue. And it's funny because there's an old country music song, I think it's by Garth Brooks, and it talks about thank God for unanswered prayers. Imagine if God answered all of your prayers through your whole life the way you wanted, that you would keep that boyfriend or that girlfriend or all those kind of different things that you might have prayed about. Thank God he didn't answer some of my prayers. So here you go.
And in a minute,
I shouldn't say, thank God he didn't answer him in the way I wanted.
I'll get to directly telling you what my beliefs about God now are. But first, what changed me? What happened? What I see that changed my mind? Well, one observation I've had over the past 3 years, especially, was hashtag pandemic. Over the past 3 years, I've found myself accidentally getting more Christian. Like without even intentionally trying, like setting out on a mission, like, hey, I want to become more Christian. It's just been effortlessly happening for me. Now, I don't think I'm unique there because I've seen a lot of people and I've heard a lot of people telling me similar stories. So I asked the question, why are people getting more Christian without even trying? Here's what I believe to be true about that. The presence of evil and Satan that evil emanates from has never been more obvious, at least in my lifetime. The past 3 years, evil isn't hiding anymore. It's coming at us through authoritarianism, movements, people, groups, companies, governments, trying to invade our minds, invade our God-given free will. So as that's become more obvious, I think there's a natural polarity that happens. If you're not someone who's willing to do the devil's bidding, if you're not someone who's willing to propagate evil, then there's a natural occurrence that happens when you're in the presence of evil, you polarize to the other extreme. Like you may not even be consciously aware of it, but the presence of evil makes you lean away.
He's completely on the money. And this relates to what we call self-identity and self-categorization theory. Self-identity is improving one's social identity. Social identity. Improving one's social identity involves processes of categorizations and self-enhancement with subjective beliefs about the legitimacy and stability of one's in-groups and out-groups and the potential for social mobility. And self-categorization flows from this theory to create in-group and out-group prototypes. So what happens is when you're in the presence of evil and you recognize so clearly the out-group, the evil group, you polarize to the other side. And that's exactly what happened to JP here. He polarized to the Christian side, the Christian battle between God, good, all loving versus evil. And it's one of the reasons why we see when people are in the throes of the most evil situations or in the highest levels of suffering, why they turn to God. Because when you're in the presence of something where it requires love, which is when you're in the presence, say, if you're in a Nazi death camp or you're inside of a communist gulag or you're in some terrible, terrible prison system, you're in some awful place, why many times people start trying to seek the truth and seek love, seek ultimate love, seek the love that God has, the mercy that God has. That's one of the things that you do and why you see some of the most ardent believers coming out of such awful systems. Why you saw St. Paul and St. Peter and all of the apostles and all of the actions that they took. They were immersed in a system of persecution. And rather than fleeing from the persecution and taking on very easy lives, they dove in and fought against the enemy. And the same thing is happening today. When we can go to watch movies, television movies, or you watch the Oscars, or you watch any of those sorts of things, and you see people openly showing satanic symbols with their fingers, or they're wearing satanic clothing, or you see the clothing manufacturer, I think it's called Bellaruga or something like that. In the background of the video, they're talking about things like child pornography. When you see these kinds of awful things in society, it polarizes you to realize there's some good, there's something on the other side. I want nothing to do with that. I want no part of that. And it explains that. And it also explains why we move away. And so let's keep going.
Then, therefore, what direction are you leaning towards? That would be the direction of God, certainly the opposite of evil, the opposite of Satan.
That's one reason why Elie Wiesel, who was in the Nazi death camps, one of the reasons why he said the opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is apathy. And that's very true. Satan loves the apathetic believer, the sometimes Sunday worshiper, the person they call a creaster who goes in on Christmas and Easter to church. Satan loves those kind of people because they are apathetic towards God. They don't investigate all of the facts around the world in which we live. They don't do that. And so he loves that. He loves the apathetic. Those are the people who look the other way when they see somebody being raped or somebody being murdered. They don't want to hassle themselves by reporting it or stay around. You know, it's interesting. My brother-in-law he spotted something terrible happen. He saw a guy shoot another guy down in Boca Raton. And rather than ignore the situation and go back to his house and just hang around the rest of the afternoon, he called the cops and he reported everything he knew. And it cost him probably 4 hours of his afternoon. But he wasn't going to sit around and be apathetic because he knew how wrong what he saw was. And so that person, I believe, was arrested and everything happened in right order, thanks to my brother-in-law. So here we go.
So I think that's seeing the presence of evil. That's why I've just accidentally been getting more Christian, why so many other people are. Because right now, I think the evil that's in this world is doing a great service of driving a lot of people to find God in ways that they previously hadn't. And also specifically, we could say, hey, there is an attempt to bring communism all over the world. Certainly in the United States, we don't call it that, but it is that.
And he's right. So read the book called The Naked Communist. This is not a new attempt. This is not an attempt from just the past few years. I don't think JP is thinking it is either, because of course he's also has heard about what happened under the communist regimes of China, the USSR, and Cambodia in the last century, and how that led to the deaths, the untimely deaths of 120 million people. And I'm sure he knows about Ukraine and how the Ukraine had the Holodomor in 1932 and 1933, in which the Russians purposely starved the people of Ukraine, and millions of them perished as a result. I'm sure he's heard about that. And he probably also heard about all this stuff having been predicted by Mother Mary at Fatima. Mother Mary said, if people don't change their errors and turn to God and stop hurting Jesus, stop doing things towards Jesus, that Russia was going to spread its airs. And of course, that happened. That was in 1917. And that was in the midst of World War I. She also said that World War I was going to end. And she predicted World War II. And of course, two other visionaries, she's predicted a final war, another war. We're going to get another world war. But she also said Russia would spread its airs. And of course, that's exactly what happened. Right around that same time, we have Russia getting power. And of course, we know what happened with the USSR and the Cold War in the years that followed between Russia and the United States. We've all heard of that. And we also see that it hasn't gone away. When Cleon Skousen wrote The Naked Communist in the 60s, 1960s, he was talking about the plans of the communists to infiltrate our systems, to infiltrate our schools and our media, and to do all kinds of things like that. And we can see that they've had some successes. Now, JP is going to outline the differences between the Democrats and the Republicans today. So you might find this interesting too.
And it's happening all over the world. And there's a reason why communists have their number one objective to disconnect people from God, where they ban religions. And of course, right now it's more like discouraging it, shaming it. But with full-on communism, they ban religion. Why is that? Because they don't want people having faith in a real higher power. So if you can get people to disconnect from God, if you get people to disconnect from the teachings of God and the ways of God, the belief in God, then those communists get to be your higher power. And honestly, they make a crappy higher power. They don't even make good fertilizer. That's not a good substitute for God. But for people who want to control you, which is what evil is, anytime someone tries to control you in a way that's not in your best interest, that's what I call evil. So for the force of evil that is communism, wanting to control you, they realize people who have a faith in a real higher power, God, they're not controllable. So we have to become their higher power. We need them to depend on us, not depending on their faith in God, but that we need them to depend on us.
And that's one of the principles that we can see goes on with the communists. They take away all of your property. If you're a true communist, the idea from the communist governments, the ones that have tried communism and of course failed, and if you're a Marxist and you're listening to this and you think, oh, well, we just haven't seen it played out exactly how Marx envisioned. Marx had a terrible vision. It was a ridiculous vision. It was the idea that there was a good versus a bad. There's a bourgeoisie and there's a proletariat. And people who were at the higher end of society, who were the hardworking capitalists, as he called them, those people were the ones who were providing businesses and jobs to people who were the workers. And he demonized them, just as it was played out in Venezuela under Chavez. Chavez demonized certain industries and demonized the business leaders and the millionaires and the billionaires in a lot of industries. And he got the regular working folk to look down on those people. And he was able to justify the fact that he took over a bunch of industries and drove them to the ground. One of the reasons why over 90% of people in Venezuela are starving today and impoverished, and one of the major causes of death, which they're covering up in Venezuela, is starvation, is because of Hugo Chavez. He had on banners a bunch of sales pitches on socialism. He didn't want to label it communism because he realized that would have bad optics. So rather, he called it socialism. And he had people supporting him like Bernie Sanders and Sean Penn. And he ended up making billions himself, which he's passed down to his heirs now because he's passed away. But he ended up making billions himself and for his cronies, and the other people in the society suffered. Now, if you're under a communist society, the principle is that you're going to do all of the work, everyone's going to get paid the same, and everyone's going to be happy. Now, imagine if you're a student in a classroom, and I told all my students, it doesn't matter how hard you work on my test, I'm going to give all of you C grades. But the difference is people stop working. You realize there's no motivation to work hard. So why work hard? And people stop working at all. And they try to get away with doing the most minimal work forever. And that's one of the reasons why, rather than everyone earning C grades, they truly end up getting D grades and then F grades. Then they flunk. How would you like a system like that? Well, that's exactly what we've seen in communist China and in Russia and in other states of Russia at one point under the USSR umbrella. We saw all of that kind of stuff play out. The Russians wouldn't even allow people who were farmers to keep their own farm produce. If you were caught stealing produce from your own farm, you'd be thrown in the gulags, and that included small children. wives, women. It included a number of people. They threw people in the gulags who were merely religious because they were religious. They threw lots and lots of priests into the gulags. And they threw lots of people away, and then they tortured them there. Read the Gulag Archipelago. It's a damn shame that nobody's read that book. It is a real shame. It's terrible. You have to read that book to see exactly what went on back in the Soviet Union in those times, because it was horrific. And if we don't know about history, we're going to sadly repeat history. So here we go.
Need us, be obedient to us, or else communism just doesn't work. And even when that happens, it still doesn't work, but nonetheless. Now, there's a lot I don't know, but one thing I do know is when you have faith in God, you are not controllable. You're not. The fear-mongering, the fear of death that ultimately all fear-mongering points to, like, hey, the climate's changing, the climate's going to kill you. Hey, look at this disease. Look at the death toll on the bottom of CNN. All that fear-mongering really preys on the fear of death that people have. But here's the deal. When you believe in God, you also therefore believe in the afterlife. You believe in heaven. So you don't really fear death the way you fear death if you believe there is no God. Why? Because you're like, well, okay, if I die, which I don't want to, but if I do, okay, I'm in heaven. That's actually beautiful. So the brave, bold freedom statement of it's better to die on your feet than live on your knees becomes something that people of faith will live by. That's why communists, globalists, anyone who wants to control you purposely tries to disconnect you from God, because God's way is freedom.
Notice something that also happened during the pandemic. They closed down the churches, but they kept the liquor stores open. They kept the Planned Parenthood open. They kept those kind of places open rather than keeping the place where you can go and worship God open. Many people didn't go to the church, and of course, they were winning under that sort of system. You need to go to church. You need to revere God, praise God, pray to God, and do all of that within a community. The community is very strong in its fight against the demonic world.
Evil constricts, God frees.
I just want to point out to Shiami, I totally agree with you about the atheist reading the book Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand. I read that book when I was in my 20s, and it blew me away. It was amazing. It was a story about John. It starts with John Galt. Who is John Galt? And it talks about a fearless entrepreneur and a handful of entrepreneurs who were working very hard within a system that was ever growing communist. And he ended up taking other entrepreneurs and himself and moving away from society because of what they were doing and how they were basically taking everything away from him, taking any motivation away from people who were working very hard and trying to produce something. The producers, or what they would call the capitalists. And so they formed their own little island where they survived and thrived, and they were away from society, the leaders in society who were trying to take away everything that they had. Ayn Rand herself is actually an atheist, or was an atheist. It's interesting that she had this egoist philosophy. It's not the perfect philosophy, and capitalism is not perfect. There's definitely some flaws when greed gets involved in capitalism, but it's the best system we have. And it's the one that actually taps into natural human tendencies and motivations to work hard and to realize a reward from working hard. Another quick theory, it's called expectancy theory. I expect that my efforts that I put in are going to lead to performance, and I expect that that performance is going to lead to outcomes. And if I desire those outcomes, if I'm being paid fairly for my efforts and my hard work and my performance, then I'm going to keep working hard. That's expectancy theory. It's a natural human theory, and it fits well within the whole capitalist framework or the free market framework. But now I'm digressing again. So let's get back. I love what JP is saying here, by the way.
God gives us free will. That's our expression of freedom. That's God's way. Communists don't like that. Globalists don't like that, because God's way makes you uncontrollable to them. And we can see that tyrannical authoritarians attempt to disconnect people from their faith in God. It's certainly at play now. Now, statistically, 50 years ago, 98% of Americans believed in God. Today, statistically, just 81% of Americans believe in God. And then from a political perspective, it's actually interesting to see that just 64% of Democrats believe in God, while 92% of Republicans believe in God.
When I was going to the Baptist church, I'll just point this out. It was really funny. That was when I said I was a liberal, a very liberal Christian in the Baptist church. And I remember the pastor, Pastor David, was a very conservative Christian. And he would talk about the values of conservatism, the values of being pro-life, and all of those different kinds of things. And I remember we had a little email exchange a couple of times. And I remember saying to him, he was on Twitter at the time, I was on Twitter. And I said to him, why are all of these atheists, it seems like they're all Democrats. What's going on? And I think he probably chuckled to himself. He did not know he moved from the church. He probably doesn't know now that I've converted back. I'm an independent, but I have to say I'm definitely a conservative independent. I just want to choose the party by the person. And I happen to be a big fan of Ron DeSantis. So if that makes any of you walk away right now, so be it. I just love Ron DeSantis. I think he's doing a lot of great things for Florida. I'm a Floridian. I would hate to lose him as our governor because he becomes the president, but who cares if he becomes a president? We better find another governor clone of his. He's a fantastic governor and he's done us right. And he treated us well during the pandemic when he let us keep our businesses open and our churches open and do all of these wonderful things. And he's making sure that kids aren't being indoctrinated in the schools by terrible ideas. But I digress again. Here we go.
And of course, right now, as it stands, the evil, the satanic ways, the communist ways tend to be much more abundant on the Democrat side. So it's not too surprising that just 62% of Democrats believe in God. And specifically, we see the coercion to disconnect people from God playing out in all kinds of propaganda, the gender ideology propaganda, where they're attempting to get people to believe that God made mistakes, which is a fascinating way to basically get people to not believe in God, because if you believe in God, you probably believe God doesn't make too many mistakes. Like, hey,
yeah, God does not make mistakes. In Genesis 1:27, God says, He let us make man in our image, and He made men and women in His image. The idea is we are God imagers. We are bearing God's image, and we're very blessed in that way. It distinguishes us. It makes us exceptional as a part of God's world, as a part of the world in which we live. We're exceptional. We're not animals. We're not merely animals. We are made in God's image. And unfortunately, people on the other side, if you want to call it that, whenever they equate us to gorillas or to apes or to anything like that, these lower level life forms, when they do that kind of stuff, many of them refuse to acknowledge the many special assets that humanity has. The fact that we can conceptualize, the fact that we are rational, we're reasonable beings. We reason, we intuit. We dream, we do all kinds of things that distinguish us. We can be very spiritual. We think about things to a higher extent. We build buildings, we build monuments, we build statues, we paint paintings, we do all kinds of things that distinguish us from other life forms on this planet. And God even told Adam, go name the animals. When you name something, it automatically says that you have some sort of authority over that something. So if you name your dog, it's because you have authority over your dog. Just like when I name my child as a parent, I have the authority over my parent. That's why, as people like Chad Ripperger, who's a person who's a Catholic priest, he says, don't try to name your guardian angel. Everyone has this guardian angel, and you also unfortunately have a demonic counterpart, but you have this guardian angel. Don't name it, because the guardian angel, you don't have authority over the guardian angel. You can't name the guardian angel, but you do have authority over your children, and that's who you can name. And God also has authority over us, and that's why Jesus has given people different names. So that's why Peter, he said, you are Cephas, was initially Simon. Simon, no, you are Cephas, or Peter. Those are two different words for rock. So you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail. He had the authority over Peter to give him a name. Same thing with God telling Abram and Sarai that you are Abraham and Sarah, and he had the authority to change the name. He names us.
Look at this junk between my legs. I'm the wrong gender. So they try to teach us your mind, what you want. You are right. God's wrong. God made a mistake. Dude, you're totally right about you should be a woman. God made a mistake. So, there probably is no God. But when we see all this gender ideology stuff that hinges on that principle that there probably was a God, he wouldn't be screwing up your gender now, would he? We see that coming at our kids all the time. And amongst other devious intentions behind that kind of ideology, I believe one of the principal ones at its core is to disconnect people from their faith in God. So here's what I believe now. I now look at traditional Christian values with a lot of respect and reverence, and I'm integrating those more into my life. I will make no claims that I'm the world's best Christian or most devoted Christian, but I'm looking at these Christian values and they make way more sense to me now than they previously did. Christian values around faith in God, Christian values around family first. And I now believe that the power of prayer is the most important thing you and I can do. I believe prayer is powerful.
He is so right about that. And I want to highlight what he said about the family. Christians really advocate for the nuclear family, the mother, the father, and the children. That's a nuclear family, and it's something very much appreciated and has been appreciated through time. One of the ways that humans have succeeded and prospered is through the strength of the family. And Mother Mary did say to visionaries, to different visionaries, not just one, but she also said it to Sister, oh, what's her name? Now I'm forgetting her name. I'll remember it in a second. But the three visionaries at Fatima, she told them that one of Satan's plans was to try to break up the family. And you can see that going on. You saw under the BLM movement, the idea that there's going to be, they were trained Marxists. They said they were trained Marxists. They wanted to advocate for the society raising the children, and communists like that too. They want kids out of the families. They wanted to separate kids from families, raise them in the public schools through their indoctrination in those schools. So if you go back and you see some of the writings in Russia from the past and in the US and in Ukraine, you can see some of these communistic indoctrinations and outcomes. And it's really unfortunate that we see that kind of thing. One of the things that we've seen now are many people aren't getting married. And many people are having lots of sex outside of wedlock and ending up having multiple kids from multiple fathers and not marrying the fathers. And unfortunately, in those kind of systems, there ends up being a cycle of poverty and a cycle of crime. And of course, that's right under Satan's wheelhouse. He likes that. That's what he wants to see. He wants to see people in unmarried families, or people who've not maybe chosen to marry and the father has decided he doesn't want to stay married or something like that, or people cheat on each other, or they think it's really easy to go get divorced because they're not happy anymore. That's not the system God planned. When you get married, the idea is you stay married through thick and through thin. You don't just go get divorced because things became less comfortable than they were before, or one person got sick, or something else happened. The idea is to stay married in your strength as a couple. You're showing your children exactly what you want them to do, and they will emulate you by staying married in the future. Now, this does not have anything to do with abuse. I'm not talking about cases of abuse. That's totally a separate issue. I'm talking about the general marriage that ends up in divorce because people are suddenly find somebody else. The grass is greener on the other side. And, oh, I think I'd rather marry that woman. She's younger. She's prettier. I'm going to have to leave my old hag of a wife. It's just terrible. Too easy to do that. So here we go.
I believe prayer brings about change. I believe prayer brings God into a place where God is needed, where God has been absent of, where the evil has starved out the oxygen of God. I think we need more prayer. Now, I don't know for sure. Here's how I look at prayer. You just imagine you're in an underwater submarine as opposed to the above water submarines. But nonetheless, you're underwater in a submarine and you've got a limited oxygen supply. When oxygen starts running out, you're in trouble. And you look around the world today, people are in trouble. We really are. So what can you do? You need this oxygen. It's your life force. So, okay, we got to bring oxygen from the surface down to us here in this little submarine where we're at. How are we going to do it? Well, if you're in a submarine, some kind of tube system going up to the surface that pumps down oxygen into the submarine where it's needed. That's what you got to do. And I think prayer works in a similar way, where you look at where prayer is needed, God's will is needed. It's absent of God, whether it's like, hey, the World Economic Forum, or political prisoners from January 6th, or children in public schools, or individual situations you or I might be in. We need God. We need blessings. We need support. How are we going to get it?
He's actually going to go on and mention a few world leaders and talk about the importance of praying for these people, pray that they find God, because many of them unfortunately have lost God. And that's a really good point. A lot of times you want to demonize the world leaders and to talk down to people who are in high places. And a lot of times you try to, just like some people try to talk down to God, you punch up. You punch up. And so what if you actually prayed for those above you, those in higher places? Because if those people in high places come to God, imagine how wonderful the world can be.
So cool. We're in the submarine. I believe prayer becomes the tube that channels the oxygen of God down to us. So it's like, God's there. God's there. But we got to bring God into this situation. So I think when we're in a prayerful state of mind, we're opening up a channel to bring God where God is needed. And how the system tends to be set up, the way I believe God set it up, is we have free will, which means God loves us enough to function disconnected from God, if that's our choice, or we can bring God into this situation. So I believe when we pray, we're opening up a tube to directly connect from God and bring God into the space over which we're praying. We're bringing oxygen where it's needed. Sounds kind of artsy fartsy. Obviously, that's not scientifically true, but maybe it's metaphorically true. But nonetheless, I now view prayer as essential. It's what we need. And that's how I think it works. And get this, right now, I think we're at a time of spiritual warfare. We look at what's going on in the world, conflict between different nations, division all over the place. We want to teach this to your kids. It's like, you seem kind of satanic. Well, that's because I think they are. So even though we see these literal things playing out at the physical level, I think what we're seeing is symptoms of what's happening at more of a metaphysical level. I think
He's actually spot on. Through the centuries, people have realized that we live in a spiritual environment, and there is good versus evil, and there are good spirits versus evil spirits. That's been known through the centuries. It only wasn't until about the 1700s or the 1800s that in certain universities, especially in Germany and in England and other places like that, that we had people call themselves rationalists, secularists. They decided to move away from what they called tradition and religion, and they wanted to move away from the idea that there was a spiritual world. But thousands of years of humanity has not believed that idea. Unfortunately, those same people decide that they're going to rewrite the way that the Bible was given to us, handed down to us. They try to say that there can't be prophecies in the Bible. They hate the idea of the book of Daniel that speaks of Antiochus Epiphanes, because Daniel was written in the 6th century BC and Antiochus appeared in 165, right around 165 BC. And he did all of the things that Daniel said he was going to do. That really bugs them. So they claim that Daniel had to be written after Antiochus reigned. They also can't stand the idea that Cyrus was named. King Cyrus, the Persian king, was named by Isaiah. King Cyrus didn't appear in the Bible. He appeared around 539 when the Babylonian kingdom fell to the Medo-Persian kingdom. King Cyrus appeared and he was named by God, and God said specifically, I am naming you. You are king. Cyrus, he named him. And it was really important there. So they claim that there's a Deutero or a Trito Isaiah, that there was a school of Isaiah that was passed down. They make these claims because they can't stand the theological implications of having stuff in the Bible that was predicted, because they know that God is the only one who knows the future. They know that that happens. God is outside time. He's transcendent to the world. He became immanent in the world. He came into the world and dwelt among us as Jesus. So one of the things I noticed about JP's video here, I just want to make a few little comments about it. One of the things I noticed is he said he realized that he shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. He realized that there has been some corruption in the church, and we acknowledge that. And Mother Mary also predicted to the children at Fatima that that was going to happen. Sister Lucia was the name I was looking for. So she had also predicted that there would be corruption in the church, and we saw that in the 90s. Now, I have watched a number of videos from Catholic priests today that would talk about the rigor that it takes to become a Catholic. In fact, I'm going to have one person who is contemplating becoming a Catholic priest on my channel next Saturday. You're going to want to watch that. His name's Swan Sona. Swan took a lot of time getting involved with Catholic priests and people who are thinking of becoming Catholic priests to determine whether or not he was fit and called by God to be a Catholic priest. And he had to go through a very rigorous process. They're very upset, the Catholic priests, about what happened in the 90s and the abuse that had been overlooked. And they're trying very hard today to go through a really difficult vetting system to make sure they don't have that kind of thing happen again. And it's amazing what they've come up with. The Catholics have a lot of good things going for them. They have a tradition that's been handed down since Jesus. They have an apostolic succession. They have a church that can articulate and explain to us many different doctrines to help explain what is going on in the Bible, because sometimes there's verses in the Bible that seemingly, though they don't, but seemingly might contradict each other, and people can interpret them in different ways. And the Catholic Church, through the Catechism, has given us a very solid explanation of its doctrines through the saints, which also the Catholic Church has, which is pretty amazing. I mean, if you want to find out what the Catholic Church thinks, go to Augustine or Aquinas or Catherine of Siena, go to Sister Faustina. There are many people in the church who've helped to articulate exactly what God has to say. And they also speak of purgatory, which is sort of a cleansing system, which happens to us after we die to make sure that we enter heaven clean and free from sin. And they also speak to a number of other different things that are really important. And so the nice thing about the Catholic Church is we have an authority structure. It goes Jesus, the Pope, the archbishops, bishops, priests, deacons. We've got all these people. Now, I didn't go completely in order there because I haven't studied that portion yet. I need to still get to that. But anyway, that's the bottom line. We have a system. Now, JP said he realized maybe throw the bathwater out, not God out of the bathwater, the baby out with the bathwater. But yes, we do want to throw out the system that the Catholic Church, certain parts of what happened in the 1990s, the abuse in the Catholic Church. We certainly want to get rid of that. But what's interesting is Peter Kreeft has said, it's amazing, despite its corruption in the past, and despite some bad popes and despite some bad decisions of the past, that the Catholic Church has survived. It's a testimony to what Jesus promised. He said, on this rock I will build my church and the gates of Hades will not prevail. And as Michael Heiser has pointed out, he built the church, on the rock. He said that to Peter, apparently at Mount Hebron, which was just a place of demonic activity. It's where Jesus cast out the demons into pigs, I should say. And so it was a terrible place. So he built it on Peter. Now, Peter ended up being martyred, probably crucified upside down. That's what the early church father said. He ended up being martyred at what's now St. Basilica in Rome, in the Vatican. And so literally the church was built on Peter. It was built on the body of Peter and built up around that, which is pretty cool. So that's another little thing to point out. I want to say hi to people in the chat while I'm here. I see Sith Singer. I see Shiami, Gary Priestley, and Harry Stark. And so if you haven't had a chance to look at the videos that Harry Stark has produced on my channel, I have a little area where you can go and you can check out all of these videos. It's pretty neat stuff. So definitely want to see Harry Stark's videos. I do not monetize Harry Stark's videos because they're by Harry Stark, and I want to take no time away from you watching the video by having some sort of a commercial or ad appear in the video. So that's another thing. I am also going to have a traditional Catholic on my channel on Monday. So be sure to come back for that as well. His name's Kevin. I've had him on my channel before. He's going to also be airing this on his channel at the same time. And we're going to discuss moral realism and objective morality and whether or not we have objective morality. Do we have an objective truth? Now, I, of course, affirm that we do. That's a Catholic belief. But it's interesting because Kevin doesn't. He was a traditional Catholic. He actually left the church, and he's now an agnostic. And he now thinks that we're in sort of a relativistic society. And so we're going to really dig into that because I've been studying that not only for my channel, not only for my beliefs in Christianity, but also for my academic position in my academic discipline. I'm a business management professor. And so I have been studying that topic for a very long time. And I'm going to also unload some of the other information I have about that topic that I think you might find interesting. Yes, I've interviewed, in case you're wondering who I've interviewed on this channel, I want to interview JP Sears. JP, if for some crazy reason you stumble upon this video, I would love to interview you. I know I'm a teeny little puny channel, but hey, I've got God. Got hope? That's what I've called my channel. Got hope? And so got God. It's very similar. I'd love to have JP on my channel. I've interviewed Gary Habermas. I've interviewed Mike Licona, Lydia, and Tim McGrew. I've interviewed Mike Winger, all kinds of Protestants, all kinds of Catholics, all kinds of different people. I've had people on my channel who were Orthodox, who are Eastern Orthodox. I think have I had Eastern Orthodox? Actually, I'm not sure if I've had that. I've definitely had Anglicans because I've had Andrew Statelites. I've had a lot of different cool people on my channel. So be sure to go back and look at some of those videos. I've had Nancy Piercy, just to name a few. So you could do a search of my videos and find some of those great things. So definitely some great people involved. So let's get back. I'm going to listen to more of what JP has to say here because I want JP on my channel. And maybe we can even talk about how JP now has God.
Right now, Satan and God are at war. In a time of spiritual.
That is a great point. Before I get into this, I want to say, Gary, he says, I think you also interviewed Paula Gia. Yes, I've had Paula Gia and Shannon Q on my channel. I've had lots of atheists on my channel. I have no problem bringing in atheists and agnostics and discussing and debating various topics with respect to Christianity. I have no problem. I'm so strong in my faith. And it's because Jesus is real. And that's what's really exciting. He is the light of the world. He's the one who showed us the path to the Father. Through him, we get to the Father, only through him. He's an amazing path that we can trust and count on and pray to and feel encouraged by. And remember, just as he said, when you see evil in the world, as JP's bringing up, when you see that we're involved in a spiritual battle, or you hear these stories of exorcisms and this crazy stuff from people like Chad Ripperger and other exorcists. I actually listened to a really fascinating guy on Michael Knowles' channel recently, and I'm forgetting his name right now, but amazing, amazing story from this exorcist. When you hear this kind of stuff and you realize that we're in this spiritual battle and you realize that you need hope and you need light in all of this darkness. And then you go back to the Bible and you read these verses in Isaiah that say, Jesus, it doesn't say, it says that the suffering servant, he's going to bring light. You will see the light. In fact, Isaiah 53:11, in many English translations, does include what is consistent with what's in the Dead Sea Scrolls, that it says after he is pierced for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities, he's going to see the light. That's a direct reference to Jesus. Pierced. It says he's pierced. It says that same thing in Psalm 22 and Zechariah 12:10. He'd be pierced. His hands and his feet would be pierced, according to Psalm 22. Psalm 22 was written 1,000 years before Jesus walked the earth. Zechariah and Isaiah were written hundreds of years before Jesus. And they were also written hundreds of years before the Persian Empire, which created the crucifixion as a means of destruction. And the Romans perfected the crucifixion as the worst and most hideous means of destruction and killing. And that's why Tacitus, who was a Roman historian, who was a pagan, I believe, he was pagan, he's definitely not a Christian, why he said that Jesus suffered the ultimate means of death. That's why he said that. What is the ultimate means of death at that time? It was the crucifixion. But the cross itself, if you look at the cross and you realize it has 4 points, kind of like east, west, north, south, but they don't necessarily end. They could keep going up, down, and all around. It's an amazing symbol when you really think about it. So here we go.
Warfare, what's on the line is you and I.
Thank you for bringing that up. Harry, Father Dan Rehill. It's the exorcist who is on Michael Knowles' channel. Watch it. If you do nothing else today and you're thinking of a video to watch, spend the time watching that video. It's amazing.
Our souls, our children. One side wants to control us. The other side wants to free us.
Remember, Jesus said, and then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. You'll be free from sins, free from evil, free from all kinds of sinful behaviors. It's interesting because, as C.S. Lewis has pointed out and referenced George MacDonald, he said something like, imagine yourself as a living house. God comes into that house and he starts knocking down walls and moving outdoors and really shaping the house and doing all these things. You expected that you would remain a decent little castle with God, but a decent little cottage, but he wants to transform you into a castle. That's what God does. He transforms us. He starts with sort of a little piece of coal and he shines us up like a new diamond. He does that. And so you'll notice that once you come to God and you spend some years with Jesus and you really reflect on the Bible and you really get into the Gospels and the story of Jesus and the story of the apostles, and then maybe start reading the early church fathers and Aquinas and Augustine and Irenaeus and Ignatius, start looking at all of those people, Justin Martyr, read all of that stuff to get the fullness of what God has given us. And once you start doing that, you're going to notice that those little irritating sins start washing away and it becomes easier not to sin. and you realize how sin looks in the eyes of God, how evil sin is to God. Even some things that you might think are little minor sins, like ignoring a family member or failing to call your parents over 6 months because you're mad at them for something. All of these things that you do might be offending Jesus, and that's the last thing you want to do. You want to fall in love with Jesus because he is love. God is love. It says us into that to us in the Bible. Unlike the Quran, that doesn't never say that God is love. God is love. Here we go.
And I think what we do in our day-to-day lives, our actions, our thoughts, our words, is determining which side of the spiritual warfare we're fighting on. Oh, side note, I want to be honest about this. I used to have shame about saying the word God. Back when I thought like, dude, I'm spiritual, I'm so cool, but not religious. I used to have shame about using the word God, and instead I'd say, oh, the universe, or the all-knowing. I'd just create different names, but I actually just meant God. So I'm delighted to say now I have not only no shame about saying God, but I actually have joy in saying God.
What if we were all to just say God bless you to people? What if just one time today you say God bless you to somebody? Think about if everyone today said God bless you to another person, the ripple effect that could result. Think about that. Just some stranger, a random person. I was walking my dog today. I'll just tell you a quick story. Walking my dog, and a woman pulls up, and she was a nurse, and she asked me for directions. So she got out of her car and she walked up to me, and I explained to her. She was looking for, actually, this is so coincidental. She was looking for a street, and she was going to go see a patient and apparently give a patient a mammogram or something. I think that's what she said. But she was going to go, she was looking for the street church side. Isn't that a coincidence? Here I'm thinking about the church. I was listening to a tape about God. I was actually listening to JP's tape about God when a woman gets out of her car to ask me how she can find this one address on Church Side Street. And of course, I knew where the church is, this one church in our neighborhood. There's this one Baptist church. And so I knew that there were some houses aligned up on Church Side, the street that's right beside the church. And so I explained to her how to get to that. But that is really, now that I think about it, I just thought about that now. That is really kind of cool. I had that little experience happen to me. God gives us all of these little signs. So when the woman walked away, as she was getting back into her car, I turned around and I said, God bless you. And I is total stranger, but I just blurted that out. And I thought to myself, that woman seemed like such a kind woman. And the people who go into fields like nursing, I have to give so much credit to, because I think it's a very selfless field. It's all about helping other people. And there's so many good people out there who are in the business of helping other people. They really care about other people and other people's health, whether it's spiritual or physical or mental. There are people out there who really care about others. And that's the kind of thing that God loves. God loves that. It gets him all fired up. He gets excited when he knows that there are people out there working with him and for him and walking with him and for him and thinking about him all day long and reflecting on the Bible and reflecting on what we can do to be better earth travelers for our fellow humans. Wrapping this up into a teeny bow and going back to the beginning, it's the idea that while we're on this planet, wondering, why does evil exist on this planet? Why are we in this spiritual battle? It's because it makes us stronger. If we didn't have a spiritual battle, we might be very apathetic. We might be very self-absorbed. We might tend to be like Satan. That's exactly what happened to him. They were in the Garden of Eden. He was in a paradise before that, in heaven with God, and he became greedy, apathetic, self-centered, and worst of all, prideful. And he fell from heaven. Jesus said he saw Satan fall from heaven. And he also, a third of the demonic spirits fell with him from heaven. And they were all also self-absorbed, prideful, making a permanent decision. They can't turn back. They can't turn around. Heaven is heaven and hell is hell. And heaven wouldn't be heaven if it allowed hell inside. So hell is separate and it's permanent, and it's a place you do not want to go. And so God gives us the free will to decide where we want to go in our lives, whether we want to end up in heaven or whether or not we want to end up in hell. We choose that. But you shouldn't choose that. You will regret it. I'm telling you, it's an awful decision. Chad Ripperger, the exorcist, has spoken to demons who said they start bawling, they start crying about their decision, but they still, despite the crying, despite the bawling, knowing the regret, knowing the problems, they still would not want to worship God. They're fixed in this sort of position. So we're in a world in which we're in a spiritual battle. Through a social identity theory and self-categorization, we can see how we strengthen ourselves as slaves of God, if you want to call it that. Some people are really anti the slavery passages in the Bible that refer to people as slaves or servants of God. Those kind of passages, the servants of God or the slaves of God. We're working in service for God and towards God because we love God and we want to do what he wants. And it makes us stronger to be amidst evil because we can see the other side, and we fight for our side of God, good, love, against evil and hate and murder and innocent murder, what we see right now going on with the abortion debate. I just said it. Now I'm going to be demonetized. All right. So anyway, I hope that you will think about, so just let me tie that up, just to say it one more time. It's the idea that when we're in a spiritual battle, we become stronger people. We become soldiers and warriors for God. And you become strong in the Lord when you encounter evil and when you realize you want no part of it. It becomes the outgroup. Evil becomes the outgroup. The evil world becomes the outgroup. And you realize the time that you spent on this world is incredibly important, incredibly important. I can't accentuate that enough. Every moment that you live, every encounter that you have is something that God has ordained, God has wanted. God is all about putting you through a path. And sometimes you can encounter evil. You can encounter hurt and danger and terrible things. But God knows the ultimate outcome, which is in heaven with him forever and ever. And so this time you spend on earth, incredibly important and incredibly short, incredibly short. People really don't live past 120 years. You don't have that long of an opportunity to make a difference for God. So use every moment in the way that you can, because it matters. Every single thing you do. Even if you make a video and only one person watches your video and it's all about God and it's you praising God and you talking about that, or you write a passage or you say God bless you to some stranger, or you do one little thing, all those little things add up and it becomes a tremendous ripple effect on the river, on the way to the glory, on the way to God. So thank you for coming in. Please like, subscribe, and come again. And just remember, whether you eat, drink, or whatever you do it all for the glory of God. Thank you so much. Everybody have a great one. Bye-bye.